So, what is social innovation? This is why we're all here, to learn more about it. There are a lot of terms having to do with social innovation. So what we thought would be a good way to start off the weekend is to talk more about what all of these words mean, how people use them, and get everybody on the same page and give us some vocabulary to talk about it. So of course we have social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, social business, and of course social innovation. So we'll talk about these terms in more detail. So social entrepreneurship has definitely picked up a lot of traction in the past few years, but really it's been around for 40 plus years. So how many of you know about Grameen Bank? Okay, so this is a really neat organization. It's often given the title of being the first organization of microcredit. And so they've been practicing social entrepreneurship for the past 40 years. But it's only now that we're calling it that, or in the last five or 6 years or so. So of course, Grameen Bank was started by Muhammad Yunus, and it's a microcredit system, and he's basically improving the lives of the poorest of the poor in Bangladesh. That's where it started, but it's definitely the concept has grown. If you've heard of Kiva, that's another microcredit organization, so there's many all over the world now. The Stanford Center for Social Innovation, this is their definition. So social innovation is a novel solution to a social problem that's more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just, or fair than existing solutions, and where the value is created for society as a whole and not just individuals. So that can be a pretty broad topic that we're talking about. They also mentioned that social innovation is talking about ideas and solutions and the processes that these come into play. And it's also the idea of integrating public, private, and philanthropic sectors and having them all work together to come up with new and innovative solutions. So if social innovation talks about processes and ideas, how do we talk about people and organizations? So that's what we'll get into for the rest of the presentation. So I'm sure you guys have all seen this spectrum, for-profit, non-profit. It's a really easy way to talk about an organization, and as soon as you say, oh, they're a non-profit or they're a for-profit, immediately people have an idea of what kind of work that organization might do. But again, it's a spectrum. So another spectrum that we can lay over top is the level of disruptiveness. So at the top, we have an organization that has very wide-reaching disruptive systems change. And at the other end, it might be an organization that puts more emphasis on selling goods or services as opposed to being really disruptive in their industry. So this is, you might also look at this as the level of innovation or new creativity being injected into an idea. Social entrepreneurship, we can talk about this as encompassing the whole top section of the chart. So it can be anywhere from a nonprofit to a for-profit, but the important thing is that it's on the high disruptive scale. Then this is actually defined by Sally Osberg and Roger Martin. So in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, in 2007 they wrote an article that tried to define social entrepreneurship. So basically, to be a social entrepreneur, you need to identify a stable and unfair equilibrium in society that has to do with the population that is doesn't have the resources to get themselves out of that situation. And the next step would be to create a new, innovative social value proposition that would solve that problem and help get that population out of their unstable and unfair equilibrium. Sorry, their stable and unfair equilibrium. And finally, to use that social value proposition to disrupt the equilibrium and create a new one that alleviates suffering and improves quality of life. So these are all very disruptive factors that we would say are social entrepreneurship. Next, we have social business. So as you can see, it's all on the for-profit side of the spectrum, but it can range all the way from simply selling a good or service, all the way up to being highly disruptive and innovative in its field. So social business, they still have a primary social mission, and generally the dividends or the money that they make is kept within the company, or the majority of it. So the owners will pay themselves a salary, but they won't necessarily be taking out lots of money. And there's a lot of legal structures around the world that allow a company more flexibility than a charity, but less flexibility than a Fortune 500 company that can, where the shareholders can make millions of dollars. So the idea is the money stays in the company. And lastly, social enterprise. So this can encompass all 4 quadrants of the chart. And basically, we look at a social enterprise as a social mission organization that's selling goods or services to offset part of their expenses. So it could be a for-profit, it could be a non-profit, it could be highly disruptive, or it could just be simply selling something to cover its costs. An example of that would be a thrift store. So it's nothing new and groundbreaking, but it still covers their costs, and that's really important. So we'll go through examples of each of these. Enseña Chile. I put Enseña in the highly disruptive nonprofit area. So the goal is to disrupt the education system and create more equality and higher quality of education. It was modeled after Teach for America, which was a really successful program in the States, where teachers who weren't necessarily trained as teachers went to work in the vulnerable schools in the school system and basically infuse more enthusiasm and innovation, and really try and change the school system through the teachers. So Enseña Chile is fairly new, I think 2009. So it's a big problem and a new organization, so it has a long way to go to completely disrupt education in Chile, but there's a huge possibility. Next we have Reforestemos Patagonia. So it's a nonprofit. I'm sure you guys all know about it. Who doesn't know about it? Yeah. So it's a nonprofit, and the idea is to sell goods and services to offset their expenses. It's pretty simple. It's not anything revolutionary. Somebody can pay $4 to plant a tree, and that helps cover the cost of the organization. So they're achieving their mission of reforesting Patagonia and supporting that ecosystem. And definitely if they can sell trees to people who buy them as gifts, or who ask their friends to give them as gifts to their wedding, or corporate gifts to their employees, it's a great system. So now we're looking at a social business, so a for-profit that is highly disruptive in their field. So one example is Toll, and they're piloting their innovative pipeline technology in Chile. So typically water pipelines are very costly to install, and it takes a long time. So what they've developed is a way to lay flexible pipelines from a helicopter. So they can do this really quickly, and they lay the pipelines over top of any obstacles on the landscape. So they can lay pipeline over mountains, over trees. So it's a really fast and brand new way to do this type of work. So they're really disrupting the industry. Another example is Cumplo. Does everybody know about that organization? So they're disrupting lending and borrowing by providing a peer-to-peer platform, so that individuals have a really transparent way to borrow money and to lend money, and they can do it at much better rates than if they went through a bank. So I've even heard that local banks have had to reduce their rates to compete with Kuklo. So that's disrupting a huge system, which is banking. Very hard to change systems like that. So that's really very innovative. And lastly, we have Latte Water Company. So it's a for-profit business that is selling goods and services to offset expenses. So Latte was founded, I think, in 2009, and they were actually said to be the first social enterprise in Chile because they donate 100% of their profits to NGOs, which is, the true sense of a social business. In that they're helping sell, so they sell water, and any revenue that they make goes directly back into the community, which is the great thing about business, is you make a profit, and then you can use it for good things. They're also certified B Corp since 2012, which means that they meet minimum benchmarks for environmental and social responsibility, which is also great. And they're owned by a foundation, Elige Bien, who they give all their profits to the foundation, and the foundation distributes them through different NGOs that work with vulnerable populations. So this is a company that's in business to help other people. Water is just the way that they happen to do it. So hopefully that helps create a bit of a framework for you to think about all of these terms and gives you some quick examples. There'll be a lot more examples as we go. And hopefully let me know if this chart made sense to you, or if it didn't. This is the first time that we've shared it this way. But in the end, everything in that chart needs to have a social impact and a social mission. That's the main thing that ties all of these terms together. So depending where they are in the chart, they might put greater emphasis on the social mission in their decision making. For example, a nonprofit usually has greater emphasis on the social mission, whereas a social business might have slightly more emphasis on the economic decisions because that's how they're set up. Not necessarily, but yeah, essentially that's the important thing, social impact.